they're saying this now out in the open when people have been for years, the last few years, promoting this as if it's a pause button.
And it's just absurd because that's not how human biology works.
I
think there's a lot of what they claim. Intuitively, it doesn't make any sense. It defies common sense, even before you look at the data. And then you look at the data and you realize that it doesn't make any sense. But even before that, you can't. What's being claimed that you can kind of put a child in a state of suspended animation where they're kind of lingering on pause? That's not how the human body works. What you can do is try to suppress the human body's normal natural functions, but when you do that, it's a trade-off. There are consequences. There are always consequences. That's how nature works. And we also know that what are the drugs they use? Like Lupron is a drug they use as a puberty blocker, and it's just a fact that this drug, number one, to begin with, is a cancer drug, originally for older men who have prostate cancer, and they've also used it to chemically castrate sex offenders. I think in Georgia they've used it for that purpose. So it's an actual chemical castration drug used off-label for, 10-year-old or 11-year-old, 12-year-old kids.
With no long-term data.
Right.
And
because there can't be.
They're promoting it as this is the silver bullet. This is going to fix you.
Right.
This is the thing that's going to fix all your ails.
And the other thing they do is they say that, well, we don't, as this conversation has grown about actual surgery for children, which is happening all across the country, but what they always say is that, well, that's not, that's not really what's happening, especially younger kids. It's puberty blockers, not surgery. And it might be true that they're not performing actual surgeries on 12-year-olds at this point. At least that's not a common practice. But what they don't tell you is that once you put the kid on this conveyor belt, they're going to probably stay on it all the way to the surgery. You've put them in the system. You've put them on. It is like a conveyor belt system, and they're most likely not going to jump off. You start with the puberty blockers. In almost every case, it's going to lead to to hormone therapy, and then in a great many cases, they go from there to surgery. And the other thing too is that as they're going along with these drugs, you are taking away, you're sterilizing them. You're oftentimes permanently taking away their future fertility. So, you've taken away their capacity to, like a girl, you've made it so she'll never be able to have kids in the future. You've already taken that from her. She has given it up before she even could know what she's even given up. And then for her, it's kind of a logical process. Well, I've already given that up, so I might as well go get the double mastectomy, and then all down the line.
And then there's the euphoria that comes with taking testosterone that happens to them. Like almost immediately they have a different feeling and they go, oh, this is how I should have been all along. Now the medicine is helping me. It's also, if someone identifies as male or identifies as female, and this is just how they feel they are, what's the logical argument for starting to give them hormones that are not natural in their system?
I don't think there is a logical argument. The only argument you ever hear from them, and I know because I've asked, is the emotional blackmail argument that you have to do it because if you don't, they're going to kill them. But another point about the suicide thing I want to mention is that we know that trans identification has risen in the youngest generation, has risen like 20 or 30 fold, right? And what they tell us on the left is that, well, that's not social contagion. This is just people now feel comfortable to live their truth. So there's always been this many trans people. It's just that in the past they couldn't announce that to the world because it was an unaffirming society. Right. So they tell you, well, if that's true, and you had like millions of trans people in the past who are living in these unaffirming societies, and we're also told that if you don't affirm trans people, it leads to suicide, then shouldn't we see, if we look back through history, just this unbroken mass epidemic across the world of people killing themselves in mass because they're not being affirmed as trans? That's not what we find. Shouldn't we see, like, you should be able to go back to 1850 and find millions of kids killing themselves because it turns out they were trans and not being affirmed. But this child suicide almost like didn't exist up until very recently. It was basically unheard of. So it's just everything they say. It just when you apply a little bit of common sense, it all starts to break down.